Hi guys, it's Ryan here from smartsportstrade.com, and in today's video I wanted to talk about sports betting. I'm going to go through my approach to sports betting, showing how I've made a decent profit over the last few years by focusing on a few specific areas. Alright, so let's get into it. Okay, so let's look at the first strategy that I use to make money from sports betting. This strategy is called value betting. So what is value betting? It's using betting exchanges or Asian bookmakers as a value marker. So what I mean by this is that we use the odds at the betting exchanges or Asian bookmakers to indicate whether something may be value or not. Now we do this because every other bookmaker will limit winning players. So that means that winning players will end up betting with the betting exchanges or the Asian bookmakers in the end. So this leads to their odds being more efficient. And with value betting, we just look to bet with bookmakers that are slow to adjust their odds. So any bookmakers that have odds above the betting exchanges or the Asian bookmakers quite close to an event will normally be seen as value. And we're relying on the efficient market theory to make a profit long term. Now you can kind of look at this, you can Google it and you can find how efficient is the pinnacle closing line. And there's a lot of data that shows you that if you can beat the closing line at pinnacle or at the betting exchange with horses over the long term, then you're going to make money. So like I say, it sounds quite complex, but it's pretty simple really. You're just looking for odds that are consistently above that of the betting exchanges or the Asian bookmakers close to an event. Alright, so I just spoke briefly about value betting. I didn't want to speak too much about it as I've discussed this in previous videos. So now I just wanted to go through my personal results for sports betting and talk about my approach and how I approach the markets and speak about the markets that I'm betting. So you can see I started in April 2017 here, so about 2.5 years ago, and I made a profit of £12,297. That's over 674 bets, so it's not a huge amount of bets, and I've got nearly a 14% ROI. But all of this is enough to determine that I do have an actual edge in the market, which is really important. And I just wanted to speak about the two markets that I bet in, which is in-play football and mixed martial arts, and really go through how I look to find value in these markets. So let's talk a little bit about mixed martial arts betting, and here's a few reasons why I think you can find an edge in mixed martial arts betting. And the first one is that it's quite a new sport compared to like football and NFL. You know, it's only been around for about 30 years now, and I don't think many of the big syndicates or the big players are really betting in mixed martial arts markets, so they're not as efficient as other markets. And another thing tends to be that there's always a narrative with MMA fights, especially the big ones. You know, you get a lot of promotion and hype going into fights because, you know, fighters, they fight so infrequently. You know, they might only fight 2 or 3 times a year. There's often, you know, like a really big build up, and this can often lead to there being some really skewed odds that offer a lot of value. So I'll just talk about that now with a few examples, because I think that's a really big way of finding value, especially in MMA. Alright, so I wanted to talk a bit more about narratives in MMA. You don't just get narratives in MMA, you get it in all sports, and it's often a good way of finding value. So this is a really good example. It's pretty old, this fight, but it's you know, it's just a really good example of when the UFC would kind of spin a certain narrative, which wasn't really true, and that was that Brock Lesnar was the baddest man on the planet. At this time, Brock Lesnar was the heavyweight champion in the UFC, but he was still pretty new to MMA and he was still fairly green. I think he'd only had like 5 or 6 fights, and he came up against a guy called Cain Velasquez, who had quite a few more fights and skills-wise was a lot better than Brock Lesnar was. And the interesting thing is, even in the fight previous to this, Brock Lesnar fought a guy called Shane Carwin, and he took a real beating in that fight. For the first round, he showed that there was like a big deficit between his skills and the elite heavyweights at that level. But what happened in that fight was that Shane Carwin had like a near heart attack in the second round and just fell to his back and got submitted. But the interesting thing was that even though that happened and Lesnar took quite a beating, it didn't really affect the odds for his next fight, because he won the fight, there was still spinning this narrative, you know, that he was this unbeatable beast, which wasn't really true. So when this fight happened, you could get Cain Velasquez at underdog odds. I think he was about 2.5, which is pretty ridiculous because, you know, most people that knew about MMA knew that he was the rightful favourite. So the fight happened, and quite quickly it became apparent that Cain Velasquez was a much better fighter than Brock Lesnar, and he put a beating on him, and he took the UFC title from him. and then we didn't see Brock Lesnar for quite a while after that. But that was just like one really good example, and there's some more recent examples as well. And so in this second example, it's Ronda Rousey versus Amanda Nunez. It's quite similar to the first in that you have one fighter who was something of a media darling that the UFC really loved, and that was Ronda Rousey. She was a previously undefeated female fighter up until the fight before this, where she was knocked out quite brutally with a head kick, and it really exposed quite a lot of the game. Really, it showed some big holes. But the UFC coming into this fight pretty much put all the promotion into Ronda Rousey. It was all about Ronda Rousey's comeback, and there was very little about Amanda Nunez. And Amanda Nunez had just been, quietly going on, winning consistently, beating really good fighters. I mean, she dismantled Miesha Tate to win the belt. But when the odds for this fight came out, I was quite surprised that Nunez was quite a big underdog. She was like 2.7, despite the fact that really she'd shown like a lot of progression in the game, while we'd seen the opposite from Ronda Rousey. We'd seen that really she was quite limited. So anyway, the fight happened, and Amanda Nunez blasted Ronda Rousey out within like 2 minutes, just with much crisper boxing and more powerful boxing. And it was just one of those things where the odds were just insane. You won't get those odds in many other sports. It just with combat sports, sometimes you just get these really really big like value opportunities, similar to Mayweather versus McGregor. Really, you had a guy that was 0-0 who'd never fought boxing against like one of the best boxers of all time, and you could get Mayweather at like 1.2. It was just it was just ridiculous. So yeah, combat sports in general, sometimes you just get these really really good value opportunities. Let's move on to in-play football betting, and here's a few reasons why I think you can find a decent edge betting football in play, and really it applies to any other sports that you can bet in play as well. So if you think about it, in order for there to be no value to be found in a market, the market has to be inefficient for a full 90 minutes, which, given the amount of variables that can happen throughout a match, there can be red cards, there can be yellow cards, there can be substitutions, there can be weather changes, tactical changes. There's just so much that can happen throughout a match that at some point, there's going to be value on one side or the other. And also there's a lot of market sentiment in in-play football betting. So this means that at certain times the market might panic when something does or doesn't happen, which can cause like a sharp rise in odds. And when things like this happen, there's always going to be opportunity. It's more about spending time kind of watching the markets and seeing how they react, and then getting an idea for where there might be value and testing it out. And you can do this by gathering data yourself. All right, so let's look at a few key points for successful sports betting. And number one is to always get the best odds possible, and this is a pretty obvious one, but sports betting is a game of small margins, fine margins. So you always need to be making sure that you get the best odds available to you. If that's with bookmakers or betting exchanges, wherever you can, this is really important. The second key point is to bet within your bankroll. So this means when you're betting, let's say you've got £1,000 bankroll, you shouldn't really be betting 10% of that, so you wouldn't be staking £100 on each selection. You might only want to go £10-20, 1 to 2% of your bankroll, especially to start with. Just like a flat staking plan to make things easy for yourself. And the third one is to take a long-term approach with sports betting. You've got to see it as a long-term investment, maybe look at it over the course of a year, because in the short term you're going to have a lot of ups and downs, and you can't really become too excited when you're winning or too down when you're losing, because you could be just going through a bad patch, but it's still a winning, you're still using a winning strategy. So really, yeah, that's a real big one, is to make sure that you're taking a long-term approach, and you kind of measure your success or your failure over a large number of bets. Thanks a lot for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Apologies if there was a few syncing issues with this video. It seemed like the audio and the video was a bit messed up during some parts. I'll have to look into why that happened. And also, if you've got some spare time, then check out my website, smartsportstrader.com. There's a lot of interesting stuff on here. Like I've been running Making a Million from Sports Betting Challenge for about 2 years now. Made a profit of £70,000, and I go through all the strategies and my results on a monthly basis. So if this is something that interests you, it might be worth a read. So again, thank you for watching the video. Cheers.